Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really fascinating subject, the Shroud of Turin.
Absolutely. This cloth, kept in Turin, Italy, it's got this faint image of a man.
With wounds that look like crucifixion wounds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for many Catholics, it's incredibly important, maybe even the actual burial shroud of Jesus.
But it's also sparked decades of scientific debate, hasn't it?
Oh, definitely. And that's what we're diving into. We've got some reports here, BBC News Mundo, Infobay.
hmm
They cover recent forensic work and the bigger picture.
So our mission today is to sort of unpack this new forensic analysis, the stuff challenging the bloodstains, but also explore the wider mysteries using these sources.
That's the plan. Look at the science, the history, the questions that just won't go away.
Okay, let's start with that new forensic angle then. The BBC article mentions Matteo Borini from John Moores University in Liverpool.
Yes, Barini. He's a forensic scientist, and he applied a technique called bloodstain pattern analysis, BPA, to the shroud.
BPA. Right, like they use in crime scenes.
Pretty much. You look at how blood spatters, how it flows, the shapes it makes, to figure out what happened. What's interesting is, Borini wasn't initially trying to prove or disprove the shroud.
Oh, what was the aim then?
It was more about seeing if you could apply this modern technique to an old artifact like the shroud. Sort of a methodological test case.
Okay, so how did they do it? Recreating crucifixion wounds sounds intense.
It was quite involved. They used a living volunteer and also a mannequin to simulate the wounds.
Right.
And then they studied the blood flow patterns under controlled conditions.
So they could compare those patterns to what's on the shroud itself.
Exactly. They compared their results with high-res images of the shroud.
But what was the verdict? Did the patterns match up?
Well, this is the key finding.
Hmm.
They didn't really match. Not for a body that was crucified vertically or even one lying down afterwards.
Any specific examples?
Yes. The article mentions 2 rivulets of blood on the back of the left hand. Barini's analysis suggested those patterns would only happen if the person was standing upright with their arms raised at about a 45-degree angle.
Standing. That's not crucifixion.
No, not in the way it's traditionally depicted or understood physiologically.
So, Borini's conclusion from all this, what does he think the shroud is?
His conclusion, based on this specific BPA work, was that the bloodstains, at least, were likely created artificially, maybe for teaching, maybe symbolically. He classified it as a likely medieval artifact.
An artifact, not a burial shroud.
Based on the blood evidence, yes. But it's important to add his perspective. He's Catholic himself.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he said, his faith is in the Gospels, not the shroud. This finding doesn't change his belief in Christ.
That's an important distinction.
It is, and it kind of echoes the official position of the Catholic Church, too.
Right. They don't actually claim it's the genuine shroud, do they?
No, they don't make that definitive claim. They see it as a powerful symbol of Christ's suffering, regardless of its literal historical origin.
Okay, so Barini's work focuses on the bloodstains. But that's not the only major scientific investigation, is it? What about the age of the cloth itself? The radiocarbon dating.
Ah, yes, the 1988 radiocarbon test.
Oh.
That was a landmark moment covered in both our sources. Professor Michael Tite from the British Museum led the coordinating effort.
And this was done with the church's cooperation?
Absolutely. The church agreed to it and actually selected the 3 labs involved, top institutions in Oxford, Arizona, and Zurich. Very strict protocols were put in place.
How does that dating actually work with carbon atoms?
Basically, yes. Living things absorb carbon, including a tiny amount of radioactive carbon-14. When the organism, in this case, the flax plant used for the linen, dies, the C14 starts decaying at a known rate.
Like a clock.
Exactly, a radioactive clock. So they took tiny samples of the shroud linen very carefully, avoiding repaired areas, cleaned them meticulously, sent them to the labs, and each lab independently measured the remaining C14 to calculate the age.
And the results? Were they consistent?
Remarkably so. All 3 labs came back with results pointing to the same time frame, somewhere between 1260 and 1390 AD.
So, firmly medieval.
According to the C14 dating, yes, a medieval artifact.
And the church accepted this?
They acknowledged the scientific findings, yes, while still emphasizing its value as an icon, a symbol.
But not everyone accepted it. I remember reading about controversies.
Oh, definitely. As Professor Tite noted, there were immediate challenges. People claimed contamination, maybe from fires or handling, could have skewed the results, made it seem younger.
Contamination. We'll come back to that, maybe. Any other theories?
There were even, more elaborate ideas mentioned, like Masonic plots to discredit it.
Wow.
Tite strongly pushed back. emphasizing the rigorous process, the cleaning protocols, and how consistent the results were across 3 independent labs. But it shows you how much emotion is tied up in this object.
Absolutely. So we have the bloodstain analysis suggesting artificiality and the C14 dating pointing to the Middle Ages, but it's not that simple, is it? The InfoBay article brings up some lingering mysteries.
Exactly. The story is far from closed. Maybe the biggest mystery is still, how was the image itself actually formed?
Right, because it's not paint.
Well, that's the thing. Decades of tests, and scientists haven't found significant evidence of paint pigments or binders you'd expect from a painting. There was a tiny finding, maybe related to Dürer's copy from 1516, but nothing substantial on the main image.
And the image itself, it's supposed to be anatomically accurate, more so than typical medieval art.
That's a really compelling point. Take the nail wounds. The shroud shows them in the wrists, between the bones, the ulna and radius, which is where Roman crucifixion nails likely went to support body weight. But medieval and Renaissance art almost always shows the nail through the palms.
Which wouldn't actually work anatomically.
Correct. So the question is, how would a medieval artist know the correct placement, which contradicted the artistic convention of the time?
Good question. And what about the cloth itself? You mentioned the weave earlier.
Yes, the linen has a specific pattern, a 3x1 zigzag twill. This weave, according to textile experts, was common in the Middle East, like Syria, around the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD.
So centuries before the radiocarbon date.
Exactly. If the cloth was made in 13th or 14th century Europe, as the C14 suggests, finding this specific, much older Middle Eastern weave is puzzling. How did it get there? Was the dating wrong? Was the cloth much older than the image?
That does complicate the medieval timeline. And then there's this really wild part in the InfoBay piece about coins.
The coin theory.
Yeah.
Yes, this is fascinating, though highly debated. Some researchers claim they can see faint images over the eyes on the shroud.
Images of what?
Of small Roman coins, specifically lectons, minted around 30 AD under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. And supposedly, these faint images show unique misspelling. Tiberius Kakarot instead of Tiberius Caesar.
A misspelling.
Yes. And the really striking claim is that numismatists, coin experts, didn't know about coins with this specific error until after shroud photos highlighting it were published. Later, actual coins with that same misspelling were apparently found.
Whoa. So the argument is a medieval forger wouldn't know about such an obscure, error-ridden coin.
That's the implication. It seems incredibly unlikely they'd have access to or knowledge of such a specific and rare artifact. It's one of those details that supporters of an earlier date point to.
Okay, that's definitely intriguing. What else challenges the medieval dating?
Well, related to the anatomical accuracy, there's also the detailed depiction of Roman crucifixion practices and Jewish burial customs of the time.
Right, the level of detail.
The argument is that the specific knowledge needed to depict these things so accurately, the nature of the scourge marks, the crown of thorns as a cap, not a circlet, the lack of washing of the body, according to Jewish custom for victims of violence, wouldn't have been common knowledge in medieval Europe.
So putting it all together, it suggests a deeper historical knowledge than maybe expected.
Correct. And then circling back to the C14 dating, the contamination issue.
Yes, you mentioned fires and things.
The shroud has had a rough history. Fires in 1201, 1349, 1532, 1934. It was doused with water, handled, repaired. There are even melted silver droplets embedded in the cloth from a fire that melted part of its silver reliquary box.
So the idea is that newer carbon from soot, smoke, repairs, or even bacteria and fungi could have gotten into the linen fibers.
Exactly. And if that happened, especially to the samples tested in '88, it could potentially make the cloth seem younger in the C14 analysis than it actually is. It's a persistent counterargument.
So the image itself remains this huge question mark. No paint, but how did it form?
That's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? The InfoBay piece mentions how this very mystery led some scientists who were initially skeptics or atheists like Yves Delage and P. Barbier.
Anatomists and surgeon.
Yes. Studying the shroud apparently led them to believe in Christ because they couldn't explain the image through conventional means. It shows the power of the unexplained aspect.
It really does. There are other theories mentioned too, right? Like Jesus wasn't actually dead.
The swoon theory. Yes, that gets brought up sometimes, the idea he was comatose and the cloth somehow captured an image during recovery.
But the article dismisses that.
Pretty much. It notes the severe trauma, including the lance wound to the side. Recovering from that in a sealed tomb within roughly 2 days seems medically impossible.
Right. Okay. Now, one last stop on this tour. Infobae mentioned a copy in Argentina, Santiago del Estero.
Yes, the Santo Sudario de Santiago del Estero. It's a cloth about the same size as the Turin shroud.
And what's its story?
Well, the tradition, though it's debated, is that it was a copy made around 1578, gifted by Pope Gregory III to King Philip II of Spain, who then sent it to Santiago del Estero in Argentina, which was then a major colonial center.
A copy? But is it just a painting?
Some believe it might have been placed in direct contact with the original shroud and somehow received a similar image. But let's just say its authenticity as anything other than a historical copy is highly controversial. It's passed through Jesuit, family, and now Dominican hands over the centuries.
Another layer to the whole story.
Definitely adds to the historical footprint and veneration of the image, even through copies.
Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around this. We've got forensic science questioning the bloodstains, radiocarbon dating placing it in the Middle Ages.
But then we have these persistent, really difficult questions about how the image formed without paint, the unusual ancient Middle Eastern weave of the cloth, those potentially ancient coins.
The detailed anatomical and historical accuracy that seems out of place for the medieval period, and the ongoing debate about potential C14 contamination.
It really leaves us in a state of, well, uncertainty. The shroud remains deeply mysterious. Science has provided pieces, but they don't all fit neatly together yet. There's no single, universally accepted explanation.
Which leads us to our final thought for you, the listener. After hearing about all these conflicting pieces, the bloodstain analysis, the carbon dating, the fabric, the coins, the image itself, what particular aspect, what single piece of evidence or line of questioning do you find the most compelling?
What stands out to you in trying to understand this enigma? Is it the hard science of the dating? The forensics? Or is it the unexplained nature of the image and the historical clues embedded within it?
And then perhaps what kind of future research or discovery do you think might finally shed more definitive light on the Shroud of Turin? Something to ponder. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.